All right, so today we're going to dive into a source document that lays out this hidden and, yeah, highly controversial history of physics. The claim that the real science behind what some people call neuroweapons has been suppressed for decades. And trust me, it's way stranger than the usual stuff you hear.
So let's start with a pretty chilling question. And just to be clear, we're not talking about propaganda or old school psychological operations. The material we're digging into today suggests a technology that could physically, directly interact with your brain from a distance.
You know, whenever you hear about mind control tech, the usual suspect is always microwaves beaming from cell towers, right? It's a classic in conspiracy circles. But the document we're looking at, it basically says, nope, that's a distraction. It points to something much, much more fundamental to the universe itself, gravitational waves. So, according to this wild hypothesis, the real tech isn't about blasting signals from giant towers. It's about putting tiny receivers and transmitters into everyday devices. And these would use something the source calls high-frequency gravitational waves, or HFGWs, which would make those massive cell towers we see everywhere totally useless for this kind of thing.
Okay, to really get this, we've got to rewind the clock a bit, back to the Cold War. The source traces this entire field of research back to the Soviets, who were looking into stuff they called psi phenomena and transcommunication. Remote influencing. And what was at the very heart of their theories? Gravity.
So the key idea here, the absolute cornerstone of this whole thing, is something called biogravitation. Back in 1973, a Soviet physicist, Alexander Dubrov, came up with this really radical idea that living things, including our own brains, actually generate and interact with their own gravitational fields. I mean, that's way, way outside of mainstream physics. And check this out. The properties he said this force had are what make it so potent, at least in theory. We're not talking about unfocused waves. He claimed this could be aimed like a laser. But the property that's honestly the most chilling? The idea that the field could stick around after the source was gone, almost like a gravitational ghost. You can kind of see why a military might be interested in a weapon like that.
And the source says, hey, this isn't just some wild theory. It points to this as evidence, a 1972 Soviet patent from an inventor named V.A. Bunin. And the title is pretty clear, Signal Transmission and Receiving System Using Gravitational Waves. For the authors of this document, this is the smoking gun. It's proof the Soviets were trying to turn these ideas into actual tech.
But hold on, because the story takes an even darker turn here. The source claims the Soviet research wasn't even original. Instead, it was supposedly built on the wartime work of a brilliant and, deeply controversial German physicist who was tied directly to the Nazi regime.
Yeah, we're talking about Pascual Jordan. This guy is a legitimate co-founder of quantum mechanics, working alongside giants like Heisenberg. But he was also, and the source really hammers this home, an enthusiastic, card-carrying Nazi who wanted to put his science to work for the state.
And this quote, wow, it just perfectly shows how he's supposedly blended his science and his politics. He's comparing the quantum steering center of a cell to the Nazi leadership principle. For him, physics wasn't just a metaphor for a dictatorship, it was a mandate from nature itself. And according to the source, Jordan's plans were just huge. He wasn't just daydreaming, he was trying to build a whole framework for control. He founded this field he called quantum biology, to zap genes with radiation. Then he proposed an amplifier theory, suggesting tiny quantum events could be boosted to actually steer human beings. And the source makes a critical connection here. He was doing all this while working for a secret tech office in the German Navy. So what happened after the war? Well, the source claims this research didn't just vanish with the fall of the Reich. Instead, another German physicist supposedly picked up the baton, pushing these gravitational theories into even more bizarre territory, hyperdimensional space. And that brings us to a guy named Burkhard Heim. He was disabled in a lab accident while working for the German military, and afterwards he developed this incredibly complex theory of a six-dimensional universe. The source points out that he worked with people like Jordan, and his whole theory was designed to create a physical basis for things like gravity-based propulsion and psi. Okay, this diagram looks complicated, but here's the gist of Heim's model. For him, gravity wasn't just one force. He said it had three different modes. You have your standard gravity, then a second mode he called gravitophotons, which could supposedly turn gravity into electromagnetic energy, and then a third one, quintessence, that he connected to consciousness itself.
In this model, gravity wasn't just keeping your feet on the ground, it was a key to unlocking reality. So let's just lay this out on a timeline to see how it all connects. According to the source, you've got Jordan laying the quantum groundwork in the 20s and 30s. After the war, Heim builds on it with his wild hyperdimensional theories. Then, bam, over in the US in '61, you get the first mention of HFGW. And just a decade after that, the Soviets file a patent to use this stuff for communication. It really paints a picture of this continuous hidden line of research. And all of that brings us right up to the modern day. The story now shifts to a former Lockheed engineer who was a huge champion of this high-frequency gravitational wave tech, and what the source claims was a deliberate, official campaign to shut him and his work down. So, check this out. This is a schematic for a modern HFGW detector patented by a Dr. Robert Baker. The basic idea is to use super intense magnetic fields and microwaves to try and catch these incredibly tiny ripples in space-time. According to the source, this isn't just theory anymore. This is a patented next-gen device built on those same principles they were thinking about decades ago. And here's where it gets really interesting, how they planned to use it. Dr. Baker's company, GravWave, actually laid out a plan to build big ground transmitters and then develop tiny HFGW receivers that could be put right inside cell phones. This brings it all full circle, right? The cell phone isn't the weapon, it's just the host for the real tech. And the list of things they said this tech could do is just staggering. I mean, we're talking about perfectly secure communication that could go through the entire planet, surveillance that can see through solid walls. And then it just leaps from sci-fi to something else entirely, remote thought transference, and even moving missiles while they're in the air. Right, so this is the real bombshell here, the direct link to the human brain. The source makes a big deal about how Dr. Baker's company partnered with a French group called Exobiology, which was looking into gravitational brainwaves and direct brain-to-brain communication using HFGW. I mean, that's the ultimate application they're talking about in this document. But here's the twist. The source alleges that right after Dr. Baker went public with the really powerful surveillance uses of HFGW at a conference in 2007 in New Mexico, a hub of government labs, by the way, an official effort was launched to shut the entire field down. Okay, so this slide really boils it all down. On one side, you have Dr. Baker saying, hey, this tech has huge military potential. And on the other, you have a 2008 report from the Jasons, this elite group of scientists who advise the government, and their conclusion was that the whole idea is fundamentally wrong and poses no security threat, a complete and total shutdown. So what did Dr. Baker have to say about that? Well, when he was asked if he thought the Jason report was a deliberate hit job, his answer was pretty blunt. He said, it is difficult to believe otherwise. He basically argues they totally misapplied the physics and just ignored his actual research in what he thinks was a clear attempt to suppress it. So what are we supposed to make of all this? Is this a genuine secret history of weaponized physics that stretches from the Third Reich through the Cold War all the way to today? Or is it just an incredibly detailed and elaborate modern conspiracy theory? The source lays out the path, but in the end, it leaves the final judgment up to you.